So for the couple of folks that are kind of new to this, I ask for questions unless it's like super like I have missed a huge step, or maybe I'm accidentally muted. If it's important, you're welcome to speak up. But just for the efficiency of rewatching these videos in the future, that we reserve all the questions till the end of this little technical lesson. And we're going to start this technical lesson by just going to week 2 and looking at what's been uploaded. So we have our hotkey cheat sheet, a land lab photo. This will probably be the only technical lesson that I'm going to supply a source for you to use, because it's very difficult to find an image that needs all the appropriate tools that we're going to be using for today. We have a 2-page instruction, like kind of step-by-step instructions for this technical lesson, a quick presentation, and then finally a image of the Photoshop hotkey poster. So I downloaded all of this, and let's see, we're going to go over to it. So that hotkey poster, if we had more time, honestly, if we were doing like a studio together, I think I would have you all make your own hotkey poster so you can really explore and understand what all the hotkeys are in Photoshop. But you should definitely look into printing it and putting it up somewhere to make your work more efficient. So when I downloaded the work from Canvas, it came into a zip file and I put it into an assignment 2 folder. So let's see, this is all of week 2, and extract that. There we go. So the removal tools are, I think, likely one of those tools that folks quickly identify with Photoshop. If you don't know anything about Photoshop, you know you can remove things using certain tools. And I think they really help. They can help us designers in rendering and trying to kind of refine our entourages that we're using. And I think another great use of the removal tool is that when we're making renderings, we're really making paintings and suggestions of images or of sites or scenes. And the removal tool lets us kind of be the creator, and we can remove certain aspects of the landscape that we may not want to be exploring in the specific rendering. Uh-oh, looks like I might have made a technical error here, but anyways, you can still read it. There's really 5 standard removal tools in Photoshop. There are a few more, but we're just going to focus on these 5. And they all kind of fall on a spectrum of kind of control. So on the left side, we have the human control. How much can you adjust things? And then to the right, we have how much of that control are you giving up to Photoshop? I have a red line there because I think just in last April, Photoshop kind of broke itself, or kind of went above and beyond and really surprised a lot of Photoshop professionals with their new tool. So we'll explore that, which uses AI. But it's kind of a totally, I think, different tool than these other 4 on the left, which have been the standard of Photoshop for quite a long time. So I'm just going to show you kind of how these tools work in a very simple way, and then we'll jump into actually how to use those tools. So with the clone stamp tool, one of the reasons I think you might have the most kind of control over what you're kind of replacing a spot on your image with is because there's no, you're not letting Photoshop make any sort of pixels. What you're doing is, if this white circle here is your brush, you're assigning a location on the image that is being kind of directly copied and pasted to where your brush is. No adjustments are occurring, no new pixels. You'll just get kind of an exact copy of whatever location you highlight on your image. The healing brush tool has just a little flavor of Photoshop, the Photoshop brain in it. And so you can select a location on an image to copy and kind of paste. However, Photoshop will look at the surrounding pixels of wherever you're putting your new brush, and will try to edit the contents to make them feel like they're cohesive with the area around them. So this little like red aura around this white spot is kind of just showing how Photoshop, it looks at the pixels around where you're trying to place parts of your image, and it's editing whatever goes in there. Content aware fill is pretty huge. And it was really big, I think, before the remove brush tool. And it allows you to do like a huge change to your image. So you can use this to, for example, remove an entire like car from a landscape. You do have control, although there's a lot of pixels that are being recreated through Photoshop to replace or to remove your car, for example. The control you do have is by highlighting a scene that Photoshop will kind of analyze and then try to mimic as much as possible in the area that you're trying to remove. The spot healing is just really, it's like a really quick, oftentimes used for small, like often used for like portfolio shots of your face to remove blemishes or things like that. So it's good for like quick little spots, and it does very much the same thing as the healing brush, except when it looks at the surrounding pixels, it recreates the pixels in your brush. And then finally, the remove brush tool uses AI to analyze the entirety of your page and then rebuild everything that you're trying to replace. And it does this fairly almost perfectly. So we'll explore that, and we'll also look at some of the things it doesn't do so well. So we'll go over these 5 tools today and kind of show how to use them and maybe the pros and cons of them. But I do think it's important just to remember, like, there's this spectrum, and the more control you give to Photoshop, the weirder things can get sometimes. I believe in AI terms, they call it hallucinations. The computer sometimes will make up things that wouldn't actually be there. And so oftentimes it's good to try to find that middle ground for each particular use case for a tool. Okay. So what we're going to first do is, I gave you all this image that I took of the land lab a couple years ago. And you'll notice it's probably in a format or a file format that you are not familiar with, unless you're a photographer, the .nef, which is a raw file format. So if you're taking photos with like a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, I highly recommend you change your settings so you're taking photos in RAW, because what that allows you to do is have a magnitude more amount of kind of like light and color adjustments that you can have. And so I just shared this with you so that you can start to explore a different file format if you are making models and you want to take photos of them, and test that out. So we're going to start kind of where the instructions, the 2-page instruction packet starts is right here. So in Bridge, we want to right click our image and select Open in Camera Raw. Camera Raw is sort of Adobe's kind of new Lightroom Lite. It allows you to do a whole bunch of photo manipulations, and you can also do this in Photoshop too once you open it in Photoshop. You'll see that this opens up. Oh, sorry, that's actually. So what is happening in the background, I'm going to close, is that Camera Raw is actually working through Photoshop to make changes to your image. And the reason we're kind of going into Camera Raw is I just want to show you just a quick like a few things you might want to do if you're taking your own photos, and then just some like tips for if you take other people's photos and you want to make any sort of adjustments to them. So if you're taking your own photos, something you may not be considering is that you're taking photos with a lens which curves your images and changes the amount of light or color that's coming in at different parts of your image. So you can quickly change that by going down to Optics and just selecting these two, remove chromatic abrasion and use profile correction. And right away, see, it toggles off our settings, I believe. You can see how much the lens kind of curves and distorts our image, but also how much the lighting changes around the outsides and the color. So those are two tools that I highly recommend you use. And then finally, if you have found like a source image or you're using your own images, you can play around with, I find the light and color to be really nice. You can adjust the lighting to your liking, and actually just ask for some couple tweaks when you start doing this assignment, just to show that you've been exploring the potential here. Color lets you change kind of the saturation. I have always liked having a little bit more saturation. And then if you're taking photos in bad lighting, or you're like when I was working on my portfolio, I had photos I was taking that I was taking very poorly. They just introduced this new tool under details called denoise, which uses AI to kind of just refine the noise in your image and make your image more crisp. It takes like 20 minutes, so I'm not going to do it right now, but just knowing that this exists, I think, is really important. So this is a great way just to edit your photos really quickly, and it has all the tools. If you're familiar with Lightroom, it has all the tools that Lightroom has. But yeah, just try playing around with this when you open up this image. So when you're done editing the lighting of this image, just select Open Object. And what will happen is Camera Raw will open your image into Photoshop, where we can start to edit things. I'll also show you how to kind of quick go back to Camera Raw if you're working on an image and you want to continue to tweak it later. So because this is a raw file, it has like kind of layers and layers of images all in one. So it can be a little bit bigger as far as size goes than other images. Sweet. So if you were to want to kind of retroactively go back to Camera Raw, you can always go back to Bridge and do what we did before, but you could also find the Camera Raw filter, and that'll kind of open up the same window. But we're going to go into just fixing up this image and removing some clutter. So I picked this image for two reasons. One, the land lab is full of light poles, and I had spent so much time removing light poles from land lab photos because they're so numerous that right away when I was thinking about removing things for an assignment, I thought of these photos. But also we have kind of images in the background and in the foreground, and a lot of different textures that will hopefully help highlight to us how these tools are working. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are so we've talked last term about the smart object tool or smart object I guess tool or effect. We need to remove that in order to use these healing tools. So we're going to right click it and rasterize layer. And then we are going to hit Control Shift N, which is going to make a new layer for us. We're going to call this layer healing. So some people prefer to make a duplicate of the original photo and do healing on top of the duplicate. But I think that making a layer of all the healing that we're going to be doing will help show us like how these tools are working and how well they work. So we've made this new layer, and we are going to be primarily working on this layer. So you want to make sure you have it selected and highlighted. We are going to press J to open or to start using our healing tools. So you can see here is the window for the healing tools that we have. We're going to start with the spot healing brush tool. But if you were to press J and you find that you're on any of these other tools, if you press J and Shift J, you can see when you look at the tools here that I'm kind of cycling through them. So that allows you to cycle, which is really nice. So we have our spot healing. We are working on our healing layer. That's really important. We're going to first start with removing this, this light pole on the left. So I prefer to have a fairly soft brush, and you want your brush to be the size of like the widest part of that light pole. And so I got to this setting here by right clicking. You can adjust as needed, but you can also adjust the size of your brush by hitting the bracket tools. Fantastic. So we are just going to go and use that brush and draw just a straight line down on our pole. And because we're working on the healing tool, we can actually just turn this on and off to see how this works. And so when we're talking about that spot healing, you'll notice that when I turn this back on, that Photoshop was looking at the areas around the light pole and then making them inside of the area that we were trying to heal. These like flower arrangements are the same as over here. So it's taking parts of adjacent areas and applying them on top of this light pole. Fantastic. So we're going to move over. Oops. Sorry, I'm going to press B and then space. And we are going to move over to the center light pole here and select Shift J and move over to the next tool, which is our healing brush tool. So the healing brush tool is the tool that you have to define the area that you want Photoshop to look at, and it will copy that area and kind of place it where your brush is. But in addition to that, Photoshop will look at the pixels around where you're placing your or what you're trying to heal, and it'll adjust like the lighting and color as necessary to try to blend everything in for you. So in order to get this brush to work, you'll see if you click and just try to start brushing away, it'll give you a warning that you need to Alt-click to define a source point. So because we're seeing this kind of bush in this background, this lighter color bush kind of going in at this angle, I'm going to just click to the left of this light pole. I think that'll be helpful. So I'm doing Alt and selecting just to the left of that light pole. And you can see right away that we have a little bit of that tree now in our brush. We're just going to move down and you'll see how Photoshop is kind of looking where I had told it to look and moving alongside with my brush. And just by doing that, it's kind of copied just the adjacent parts and pasted them over the light pole. Kind of turn this on and off and see that this here is the same as this, which if we're zoomed in right now might look might stand out. However, as we zoom out, you'll see that this will actually be imperceptible to the eye. We'll move to the last light pole here, and we're going to use the clone stamp tool. Oh, actually, for this light, we should use the removal tool one more time. So we're going back to the healing brush, sorry, and we're going to Alt-click on the left again of this light pole and start going down. But as we do that, you may notice that this tree branch here is kind of looking a little too, there's too much of a repetition of that form. And so I would press Alt again somewhere different, try to reapply. So I'm just pressing Alt a few times and just getting different parts of the source. And by doing this, you can kind of blend things a little bit better. But you can also start to see why there's a lot of similarities between Photoshop and painting. So here's our image, and here is the lights removed. All right, so now we're gonna go to the clone stamp tool. So this fence, we're gonna remove the fences in our foreground. This fence here, we can try to use like the spot healing tool on it. Okay. But you can see that there's some blurriness that pops up. And that's particularly because I think that it's selecting some of the pixels that are blurred in the foreground. So that's not a really great tool to use for this. And so the clone stamp tool is just a great and simple way to just kind of brush over the area just to the left on top of this fence roll. And I should have mentioned, and I'll mention, or I'll make sure I put this in the video earlier, that when we're using the healing tools, that you want to select sample all layers. That's very important. I think it's number 5 on the instruction list. Sample all layers. That'll allow us, when we're working on the healing layer, to sample the layer below it. So when we go back to the stamp tool by pressing S, we want to go up to the toolbar and sample all layers. So I'm just going to select an area just to the left of the fence roll. Just going to start to, and I change the opacity. Let's just go back. Fantastic. Okay. So I'm going to select the area just to the left, start to paint in and kind of doing what we did before and just clicking a few more than once to try to break up the repetition in the pattern that the eyes might pick up on. So this is good enough. I see a little bit of a kind of a repetition, but certainly not enough to cause any issues. Although, let's see, if we press E, I'm noticing a little bit of the fence up here, and because we're working in a different layer, we can just this a little bit, remove just the top of this. Perfect. Fantastic. Before we get to the really big and exciting tool, we're going to move over here to the left. And we're going to use a tool that before the removal, the special remove tool came out, that I thought was pretty dang close to magic. And that's the content aware tool. So we're going to press M, and open up the rectangle marquee. We're going to draw a rectangle around this fence roll here. We have that selection. We can right click and we can do content aware fill. So we get a little prompt from Photoshop that just lets us know that we have to use the sampling brush tool to add a sampling area. And so pretty much Photoshop is saying that it's not sure what we want it to be filled with, and it would like us to kind of tell it what we'd like there. So with this brush, in order to, if we want to change the sizes again, it's the same. We just have to use the brackets, and we want to start to draw in let's see. Oh, we want to go to, I think the reason it's not working is in the sample area options, we want to sample all layers. There we go. So select sample all layers and then change the output to current layer. So right now we're working on our healing layer. So we want our output to be on the healing layer. So I'm just going to start to get all that grass in there so that Photoshop can see kind of what I'd like it to fill in that marquee area. If so you can kind of see the area here, and we can zoom in a bit. We're looking just under the D. That's looking okay. So if we look really hard, you can see that there's sort of these like this hard line of blurriness. And I believe the reason for that is that, again, we have this blurry foreground. And so Photoshop doesn't know any better. And it's just trying to kind of regurgitate what's on the image into this location without understanding the context of that the foreground is a little bit blurry. So we'll go back to our selection here, and let's press Alt, which changes our brush from the addition to taking away, subtraction or minus. So we'll remove that foreground that's kind of a little bit blurry there. We'll see if that helps at all. So this can always be a little bit of just a back and forth. We'll just try to remove everything that's kind of outside of the kind of frame of focus, the field of focus. There we go. So everything in this horizontal line is fairly in the same level of focus as that area. And for the most part, that change is nearly incomprehensible. I see that little corner, but we don't want to stress that at the moment because we can always adjust it later. We'll hit apply. There we go. So that little corner is a little bit annoying. We can just press E to get the eraser, just to erase that little corner there. We could roughen up the edges as much as we want. And so you can see there how the content aware is actually pretty smart because it allows us to kind of suggest what we want to have filled in that space However, I think one of the reasons that the new Photoshop Remove tool is kind of so spectacular is that you don't really need to tell it what to look at. It somehow has a good idea. So that Remove tool is that kind of Band-Aid with the stars. But before we do that, let's just try the spot healing tool on this and see what happens. See, so it did an all right job. Although it did kind of do this hallucination where it fills in the space with these dark pixels. Not sure where it got those pixels from, maybe up in the tree area. We can always try some other, like, let's try this brush. We can paint things in fairly well. But definitely a lot more painting is needed. It sort of passes the squint test, but it's still pretty obvious. So let's try the removal tool. Do Shift J to cycle through. And the removal tool is just a brush that you can adjust the size with the brackets. We'll just go over the area that we want to remove fully. Perfect. We'll let Photoshop think for a second. It's kind of analyzing the landscape. And it's done a fairly good job. There's still a little bit of some weird pattern replications there. But we can kind of roughen them up to kind of trick the eye into not seeing those patterns. So this is kind of where this image here is, let's see, let's just zoom out just a little bit more. Other than that little area, which we'll go back right in just a moment and kind of explore how to fix that a little bit. This image here is more than good enough to submit for assignment 2. So before we do that though, I know we have some perfectionists out there. You might want to kind of fix this up a little bit. And I think what I'll do, just so that we can kind of explore how well this works is, well, actually, first, before I jump into that, I just want to point out how some of those imperfections that we did kind of see while we were working in at the zoomed in level, they are gone now. It's really hard to go back and look and notice where those light poles were in the fence rules. Obviously, some spots are better than others, but if you didn't know that these elements were in the landscape photo at the time, I don't know if you would be able to tell now. So we're going to press Control Shift N. We're just going to call this healing ×2. We're just going to try to see if we can beat up this area a little bit. So what I often find when we're doing kind of landscape renderings is that even though we want things to be really clean and nice, oftentimes the more irregular and organic things are, the less likely they are to pop out. And that's one of the reasons I've always suggested stepping away from the harsh computer realities of Rhino and like the rendering softwares and throwing them into Photoshop just to beat them up a little bit. So we're gonna just pick up the healing brush. We're gonna make sure that our sample all layers is on. So I'll click over here. Just start to in a little bit on the other side. Oops. And the idea here is that we're just trying to remove some of that repetition. We really want to like kind of go at it. We could also, let's see. That's so when you press these row numbers on the top of your keyboard, that changes the opacity. I believe depending on the brush you're using, it can change the opacity of the tool or the layer. Right now it's changing the color of the layer, so or the opacity of the layers. We're just going to ignore that. And just with that little bit of kind of clicking around kind of sporadically, we've already kind of made that space inconsistent enough that it feels fairly close to being more realistic. And I think it'd be less likely to be popping out. And so even though your gut might be telling you to kind of aim for that perfection, oftentimes in Photoshop, especially with renderings, you kind of want to go into the more messy area. And the more kind of layers you add, the harder it is to discern those inconsistencies. So once you have taken away all the fence rolls and all of the light poles from this image, we're just moving into kind of, the packaging this up and exporting it. So first of all, I just want to look at the difference between what we had before and what we have now. And then let's look at the before image here and the after. That looks pretty wildly different. So for this assignment, I would like to see the final rendering of everything removed from your photo. But also I want to see your layers. I want to make sure that you're working hard to keep your layers organized. So I ask for a screenshot. So for me, that's Windows Shift S. Just take a screenshot of your layers. And then what we can do is in Photoshop, we're always trying to avoid kind of permanently changing our source imagery. Unfortunately, by removing that smart what's it called? Smart filter, we did remove the ability to like go back and undo our edits. But there's a spot here that we can kind of make sure that we retain our source imagery. So we're going to select all of our layers. And we are going to press Control G, which is going to group them. And then let's hit Control J, which is going to duplicate that group. So if we just open up these like little folders here, we'll see we see they're duplicated. And then what we'll do is right click our group one copy and just merge group. And that'll just give us that final photo of all those layers combined into one. So then export this. Let's see, we'll open up our stop recording from here.